If you earn $60,000 a year in Canada, you are doing better than most people in this country. I know that might not feel true. Maybe you're renting a two-bedroom apartment, watching your grocery bill climb every week, and wondering why it feels like your paycheck disappears before the next one arrives. But here's what the data actually says. The median employment income for a Canadian individual is around $48,500 per year. That means half of all working Canadians earn less than that, not less than $100,000, less than $48,500. So before we talk about what life looks like at every income level in this country, the first thing we need to do is reset what you think normal looks like. Because for most Canadians, normal is a lot more modest than what you see on your Instagram feed. This conversation matters right now because Canadians are in the middle of a cost of living crisis that has completely distorted our sense of what things are supposed to cost and what income is supposed to feel like. Inflation hit a 40-year high of 8.1% in June 2022. Grocery prices rose over 10% year over year at their peak. Mortgage carrying costs for new buyers roughly doubled between 2021 and 2024. When everything is more expensive, you need more income just to feel the same. And that creates a psychological trap where almost everyone, at almost every income level, feels like they're falling behind. But feeling behind and actually being behind are two very different things. Today, we're going to look at the real numbers, where you actually sit, what each threshold actually buys you, and why the gap between what we earn and what we feel like we earn is wider than ever. Let's start with the baseline. The median total income for individual Canadians across all sources, employment, self-employment, investments, government transfers, was approximately $49,000 in 2022. For households, the median after-tax income was around $80,500. These are the numbers that define the Canadian middle, not $100,000, not $150,000, roughly $49,000 per person, or just over $80,000 per household after taxes. Keep those figures in your mind as we walk through the tiers, because everything else we're about to look at is measured relative to those anchors. Let's start at the 50th percentile, the median, and work our way up. To be in the top 50% of individual earners in Canada, you need to earn more than approximately $49,000 per year. That's it. $1 over $49,000, and you are, by income, in the upper half of all Canadians. This is the person who has a job, maybe two, and is making ends meet. They might be in retail management, an administrative role, a trade apprenticeship, or early stage professional work. They're not wealthy, but they're not in poverty either. And yet many Canadians at this level feel stretched thin, especially with rent consuming 30% to 40% or more of their take home in major cities. Now let's move to the top 25%. To sit in the top quarter of Canadian income earners, you need to earn roughly $80,000 or more per year. This is where a lot of dual income households land as a combined number. But as an individual, this represents a meaningful threshold. You're earning more than 3 out of 4 Canadians at $80,000. You're likely a mid-career professional, a nurse, a project manager, a skilled tradesperson, a teacher with seniority. After federal and provincial taxes, you're probably taking home somewhere between $58,000 and $63,000, depending on your province. That's roughly $4,800 to $5,200 per month. In Toronto or Vancouver, that covers rent and basics without a lot left over. In Regina or Moncton, that income feels considerably more comfortable. The point here is that $80,000 sounds like a solid income, and it is, but it doesn't feel elite, and the data confirms it shouldn't. It's the top 25%, not the top 5%. Now let's look at the top 10%. The threshold for the top 10% of Canadian earners sits at approximately $107,000 per year. This is the level that many Canadians perceive as the entry point to doing well, and by the numbers, they're right to feel that way. At this income, you're likely a senior professional, an experienced engineer, a pharmacist, a mid-level executive, or a successful tradesperson operating their own business. Your after-tax take-home, depending on province, is somewhere around $74,000 to $80,000 per year, or $6,200 to $6,700 per month. But here's the reality check. At $107,000, you're likely also carrying significant financial obligations. Canadians in this range are statistically the most likely cohort to hold large mortgages, be in peak child-rearing years, and maintain lifestyle costs that have expanded to match their income growth. The money is real. But so is the pressure. Now let's step into the top 5%. Earning your way into the top 5% of Canadian income earners requires a personal income of approximately $138,000 per year or more. At this level, you might be a physician, a mid-career lawyer, a senior engineer at a major company, a real estate professional in a strong market, or a small business owner in a profitable sector. Your after-tax income will sit around $92,000 to $100,000 per year in most provinces, or roughly $7,600 to $8,300 per month. This is where financial margin starts to become real. You're likely able to max out your RRSP, contribute to a TFSA, and still have money left over after housing and living costs. This is the level where wealth accumulation, not just income, can begin in a meaningful way. But don't mistake this for immunity. A significant portion of top 5% earners in Canada still report feeling financially stressed. Housing affordability, private school considerations, carrying a $1.2 million mortgage, caring for aging parents. Income in this range is genuinely high, but it's absorbed by genuinely high obligations. And finally, the top 1%. To be in the top 1% of Canadian income earners, you need to earn approximately $250,000 or more per year. There are roughly 300,000 Canadians in this group out of a tax filing population of over 30 million. At $250,000, your marginal tax rate in most provinces is above 50% on dollars earned above certain thresholds. Your after-tax income is approximately $145,000 to $160,000 per year, depending on your province, or around $12,000 to $13,000 per month. This is the income level where, for most Canadians outside of the highest cost cities, genuine financial freedom becomes achievable. You can own property, invest aggressively, travel, and save simultaneously. But even here in Vancouver or Toronto, $12,000 per month can be absorbed quickly by a $4,000 mortgage payment, a $2,000 childcare bill, and a lifestyle that has scaled to reflect perceived success. Here's where the picture gets more complicated and more honest. Income tells you how much money comes in. Net worth tells you how much of it you actually kept. And when you look at net worth data in Canada, the distribution looks very different from income. The median net worth of a Canadian family was approximately $385,000 in 2019. The most recent comprehensive data available, that sounds like a lot, but for most Canadian families, the majority of that number is home equity. Strip out the house, and the liquid financial assets of the median Canadian family are far more modest. More strikingly, the top 20% of Canadian families by net worth hold approximately 67% of all wealth in the country. The bottom 40% of Canadian families hold less than 2% of total national wealth. This means you can earn $90,000 a year and still be closer to the bottom half by net worth if you started late, carry significant debt, or live in a high-cost city where homeownership has been out of reach. And there's a second dimension that reshapes all of this. Age. A 55-year-old earning $85,000 with a paid-down home, $400,000 in registered accounts, and no debt is in a fundamentally different financial position than a 32-year-old earning $95,000 with $60,000 in student debt, renting in Calgary. Income without time, without assets, and without equity is just a number. What you do with that number over the years, that's what determines where you actually land. So why do so many Canadians earning well above the median feel like they're struggling? There are a few forces at work here, and they're not imaginary, but understanding them changes how you respond to them. The first is something behavioral economists call lifestyle inflation. As your income rises, your spending tends to rise with it. The $500 per month apartment becomes a $1,800 condo. The used Civic becomes a leased crossover. The grocery store rotisserie chicken becomes the meal kit subscription. None of these individual choices feel extravagant, but collectively they consume the raise before it can compound. The second is social comparison. And in Canada, this has a very specific geography problem. If you live in Toronto, you are constantly surrounded by visible signals of wealth, waterfront condos, luxury vehicles, curated social media lives. Toronto and Vancouver have among the highest costs of living in the country, but they also concentrate the highest earners. The result is that people in those cities earn more, pay more, and see more, and the psychological baseline of normal shifts upward accordingly. If you earn $95,000 and your neighbor is in private equity earning $400,000, your reference point gets recalibrated in a way that has nothing to do with your actual financial standing. The third factor is the hedonic treadmill, the well-documented tendency for humans to adapt to improved circumstances and return to a baseline level of satisfaction. A raise that felt meaningful in January is just the new normal by June. And in Canada specifically, there is a structural pressure that other countries don't face in quite the same way. Housing. The average price of a home in Canada reached $685,000 in early 2024. In Toronto, it was over $1 million. In Vancouver, higher still. When housing, historically the primary vehicle for middle-class wealth building, is priced out of reach for a large portion of the top 30% of earners, the standard financial life script simply stops working. That's not psychology, that's math. So where does that leave you? Here's the reframe that matters most. Stop measuring yourself against the people you see and start measuring yourself against the actual data. If you earn $65,000 in Canada, you are earning more than the national median individual income. That is a fact. If your household earns $100,000, you are in the top 25% of Canadian households by income. That is also a fact. That doesn't mean life is easy or that the cost pressures you feel aren't real. They are. But it does mean the story you've been telling yourself about how far behind you are may not be accurate. The most useful question you can ask yourself right now is this. At your current income, what percentage of each paycheck is building net worth through savings, debt repayment, or investment? And what percentage is being consumed by lifestyle? Because the data is clear. The gap between top earners and median earners in Canada is significant. But the gap between Canadians who build wealth and Canadians who don't, at the same income level, is almost entirely explained by that one ratio. If you're earning near the median and saving 10% consistently, you are on a better financial trajectory than a top 10% earner who is spending everything they make. Income gets you in the room. What you would do with it determines where you sit. Canada is a wealthy country with a very wide spread between what people earn and what people feel like they're worth. The numbers we looked at today are a reminder that your financial reality is often better than your financial feelings. If this helped you see your situation differently, subscribe, because on this channel we take the same approach to every personal finance topic Canadians are actually dealing with. Real data, no noise, and numbers that are built for this country. Next up, we're looking at what the average Canadian household actually spends each month and where the real gaps in most budgets are hiding.